The wind swept low across the plains that morning, stirring dust and brittle grass. Emma Carter stood by the fence that marked the edge of her land, the sun rising at her back. Her worn dress clung to her legs as she shielded her eyes from the glare, scanning the empty road beyond. It had been a hard year. Her husband, Jonah, had passed last winter, taken by fever after working too long in the cold. Left alone with 3 young children, Emma had done what she could to keep the farm running. They had no cattle left, just chickens and a few goats, and a garden that barely grew enough. But they managed. The Lord had given her strength, and the kids Sarah, Eli, and little Ruth had given her purpose. As she turned to head back to the house, something caught her eye near the tree line. A shape, a man. He was stumbling. Emma ran. By the time she reached him, he was on his knees, his hat fallen off, one hand clutching his side. Blood stained his shirt. His boots were cracked, his coat torn. Dust clung to his hair like ash. "Sir." Emma knelt beside him. "Can you hear me?" He looked up, barely conscious. His voice was dry and hoarse. "Water." She helped him drink from her canteen, steadying his shaking hands. "I'm going to get you help," she said, urgency rising in her chest. "Don't you give up." With effort, she half carried, half dragged him the quarter-mile to the house. Eli met her on the porch and helped bring the man inside. Sarah fetched blankets. Ruth stood wide-eyed by the door, clutching her doll. Emma worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best she could. It looked like a bullet had grazed his ribs, not deep, but infected. She boiled herbs, wrapped his side, and prayed over him late into the night. He didn't wake. The next morning, he stirred. Emma was sitting beside him with a cloth and bowl of water. His eyes opened slowly, confused and alert all at once. "Where?" "You're safe," she said softly. "You were half dead when I found you. You're lucky to be alive." He looked around, taking in the humble cabin, the fireplace, the patched-up walls. His voice cracked as he asked, "Where am I?" "My farm," Emma replied. "About 10 miles east of Dry Creek." He winced, trying to sit up. She gently pressed him back down. "Don't, you're still weak." He gave a tired, bitter smile. "Weak's an understatement." She almost smiled back. "What's your name?" He hesitated, then said, "Luke." She nodded. "Well, Luke, I'm Emma Carter. Those are my children out there." Through the window, Sarah and Eli were feeding the goats. Ruth waved from the porch. Luke blinked, emotion flickering in his eyes. "You saved me." Emma stood and adjusted the blanket over him. "God did the saving. I just boiled the water." Over the next few days, Luke healed slowly. He barely spoke at first, but watched everything. He watched Sarah take care of the younger ones like a second mother. He watched Eli carry buckets, almost too big for him, without complaint. He watched Emma work from dawn to dusk, chopping wood, fixing a broken fence post, tending the garden. No one asked him questions he didn't want to answer, but one night, as Emma sat beside the fire, sewing a tear in Ruth's dress, he finally asked, "Why'd you help me?" She looked up. "You were hurt. I couldn't just leave you. But you didn't know who I was." Emma smiled softly. "Didn't matter." He stared at the flames. "Most people would have taken my boots and left me to die." "Well," she said, tying a knot in the thread, "we ain't most people." Luke fell silent again, but something shifted in his expression. A wall, long in place, began to crack. He watched her tuck Ruth into bed. He saw how Sarah rested her head on Emma's shoulder. He noticed how Eli whispered a quiet prayer before sleep, though no one had told him to, and he thought, for the first time in a long time, that maybe not everything in this world was broken. By the end of the week, Luke was able to sit up and eat solid food. Emma had moved him to a cot near the fire, where he could rest without disturbing the children's small sleeping space. The cabin was tight, but no one complained. "Don't get used to being waited on," Emma joked one morning as she set a bowl of warm stew in front of him. "You'll be splitting firewood by next week if you want to stay." Luke managed a weak grin. "Sounds fair." The truth was, he hadn't decided what he'd do once he could walk again. Part of him wanted to leave, to disappear like he always had, but another part, quiet and unfamiliar, kept tugging at him whenever he looked at Emma or her children. They had so little, yet they gave him everything. One afternoon, while Emma was tending to the garden and the children were off gathering eggs, Luke limped outside. He walked slowly, leaning on a stick Eli had carved into a makeshift cane. Emma saw him and raised a brow. "You're pushing it." He shrugged. Sick of staring at the ceiling, she handed him a basket. "You can start by picking tomatoes. Gently, Luke nodded and knelt by the vines. As he worked, he noticed her hands rough, calloused, strong. She worked the soil like it was something sacred. There was a rhythm to her, a peace that didn't come from comfort but from purpose. "You always lived out here?" he asked. Emma nodded. "Jonah and I built this place with our own hands." "Your husband?" She glanced up. "He passed last winter." Luke paused. "I'm sorry." Emma gave a small smile. "So am I, but we go on." After a moment, she added, "The kids miss him every day, but they're tough. God gave them strong hearts." Luke looked down at the tomatoes in his hands. "They're lucky to have you." She didn't answer, just kept working. That evening, after dinner, Luke sat outside watching the stars appear one by one. Ruth toddled over and climbed into his lap without asking, clutching her worn doll. "You got a mama?" she asked. Luke blinked. "I did. A long time ago. She in heaven." He swallowed. "Yeah, she is." Ruth nodded solemnly, like she understood more than a 5-year-old should. "That's okay. You can borrow mine if you want." His breath caught. He didn't know what to say. He just wrapped his arm around her, gently, as the sky turned darker, stars winking down like promises. That night, while Emma washed up in the basin outside, Sarah stood beside her drying dishes. "Is he staying?" Sarah asked. Emma paused. "I don't know yet. He's nicer than he looks," Sarah added. "Eli likes him." Emma smiled. "I know." Then Sarah asked, "Do you trust him?" Emma's smile faded. She looked at the stars for a long time, before replying, "I trust what I see, not what I don't." Sarah tilted her head. "But what if he's hiding something?" Emma nodded slowly. "Then I'll trust God to deal with it when the time comes." Luke knew they didn't ask about his past out of kindness. But the weight of silence was growing heavier. Every moment spent with them made it harder to keep his secret, because the truth was, he wasn't just some drifter who got lost on the plains. He was the son of Thomas Waverly, one of the wealthiest landowners in the state. The Waverly Ranch stretched over 30,000 acres of prime cattle land, and his father, stern and proud, had spent his life turning it into an empire. Luke had walked away from it all years ago after a bitter fight about money, about the kind of man he wanted to be. He hadn't looked back until now. Until a stray bullet, a kind widow, and 3 children with dirt on their faces and kindness in their eyes, forced him to remember what home was supposed to feel like. That night, as Emma checked on the children, she glanced over at Luke, who pretended to be asleep. But he wasn't. He was praying. For the first time in years, not for healing, not for money, but for the courage to stay. It was early November when the storm rolled in black clouds curling over the plains like waves ready to crash. Emma had seen it coming since dawn and had the children help secure the coop, gather firewood, and bring water indoors. Luke had grown stronger over the last few weeks. The infection had cleared, and though his side still ached, he moved more easily now, his limp fading. That afternoon, as the wind began to howl, Luke helped Eli move the goats into the shed. The boy grinned up at him, cheeks red from the cold. "You move faster than you used to," Eli teased. "I've got a good teacher," Luke replied, ruffling his hair. Inside, Emma stoked the fire while Sarah braided Ruth's hair. Luke stepped in, pulling the door shut just as the first drops of rain hit the roof. The storm came hard and fast. Rain battered the windows. Wind shook the wooden walls. But the cabin held, and so did the people inside it. Emma lit extra lamps, and the children huddled close with books and stories while the wind roared outside. Later, while the children slept, Luke and Emma sat at the table in silence, sipping tea. He looked up. "You ever think about leaving this place?" She hesitated. "Sometimes, especially when it storms." Luke gave a tired smile. "Why don't you?" Emma looked around the small cabin. "Because it's home, and because I believe we're meant to bloom where we're planted." He stared at her, quiet for a moment. "Even when the ground's dry, especially then," she said softly. That night, long after everyone was asleep, Luke stepped outside into the wet darkness. The storm had passed, leaving only dripping trees and a cold wind. He looked up at the stars. His heart was heavy. The unspoken truth grew harder to carry with each day. He wasn't poor, not really. He was the estranged heir to a fortune he had walked away from. His father had offered him everything: land, wealth, a powerful name. But it came with expectations Luke had never been willing to meet. He wanted a simpler life, one where his worth wasn't measured by cattle counts or bank ledgers. Still, he knew he couldn't hide forever. He had to tell Emma the truth. The next day brought calm skies and soft light. Luke offered to chop firewood, and Emma didn't argue. He swung the axe with steady hands, the repetition clearing his mind. Later, when the children were out playing, he found Emma in the garden, inspecting what was left of the fall vegetables. "I need to talk to you," he said. She looked up, sensing the weight in his voice. He stepped closer. "I haven't been honest with you about who I am." She waited, silent. "My full name is Luke Waverly. My father owns the Waverly Ranch, thousands of acres, cattle, money, the whole lot." Emma blinked, but didn't speak. "I left that life years ago. We had a falling out. He didn't like the man I wanted to be, so I walked away from all of it." Still, she said nothing. "I didn't lie to you, to hurt you. I just didn't want you to treat me different. I wanted to earn my place here, not buy it." Finally, Emma spoke. "I figured you were hiding something." Luke's eyes widened. "You did. You weren't like most drifters," she said. "Your boots were worn, but well made. Your manners were refined. You handled a knife like someone who's eaten at both rough tables and fine ones." He gave a sheepish smile. "Why didn't you ask?" "Because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She knelt to pull a weed from the soil. "Doesn't matter to me where you come from, Luke. What matters is who you are when you're here." His chest tightened. "And who do you think I am?" Emma stood and met his eyes. "A man who could have ridden off but didn't. A man who split wood, protected my children, and prayed when he thought no one saw him." He exhaled slowly, the weight of secrecy finally lifting. "Your past doesn't scare me," she added, "but your future. That's what you need to figure out." He nodded. "I want to stay." Emma looked at him with something softer than surprise. "Then stay." And with that, the truth stopped being a burden. It became a beginning. 3 weeks passed quietly after Luke revealed the truth. The days grew colder, and the Carter farm took on the scent of wood smoke and drying herbs. The children were happier than ever. Ilwai following Luke around like a shadow, Sarah asking endless questions about ranch life, and little Ruth demanding nightly stories about princes who chop wood. But in the back of Luke's mind, one matter remained unsettled. His father, Thomas Waverly, wasn't the sort of man who forgot things, especially not a missing son. One afternoon, while helping Emma repair the chicken coop, Luke spotted a rider in the fast, dust rising behind his horse like steam off boiling water. Emma stood, eyes narrowing. "You expecting someone?" "No," Luke said, already feeling the tension return to his shoulders. The rider pulled up fast. A lean, sharp-eyed man in a worn gray coat. "You Luke Waverly?" Luke stepped forward. "I am." The man dismounted, pulled a sealed envelope from his satchel, and handed it over. "From your father," he said. "He's been looking for you for months." Before Luke could respond, the man tipped his hat and rode off without another word. Inside the cabin, Luke sat at the table, staring at the envelope. The wax seal bore the Waverly Ranch crest, a stag surrounded by pine branches. Emma watched from across the room. Saying nothing, he opened it. The handwriting was precise, familiar. "Luke, if you're reading this, you've at least had the decency to open my letter. I heard you were shot. I'm glad you're still alive, even if you insist on living like a ghost. I won't lecture you, not in writing. But know this, the ranch is not the same without you. Come home, I'll say it plainly. Come home, if not for me, then for the land you grew up on. I'm not getting younger, and the ranch needs a hand I can trust." Father Luke folded the letter slowly. His hands trembled. Emma still didn't speak. But her eyes never left him. "I swore I'd never go back," Luke murmured. "You don't have to," she said gently. "But maybe it's not about going back. Maybe it's about facing what you left behind." That evening, Luke walked out past the fence where Emma had first found him. He stared into the open plains and thought about everything that had changed since that day. He had come here broken, bleeding, lost. Now he had purpose. He had family. He just hadn't realized it until now. The next morning, he told Emma, "I'm going." She turned from the stove, heart tight. "For good." "No," he said. "Just for a little while. I need to speak with him face to face, set things right. But I'll come back." Emma nodded, though her hands shook slightly as she poured coffee. "You've given me more than shelter," he added. "You gave me a reason to be a better man. And a place worth coming back to." Eli ran in, breathless. "Where are you going?" Luke knelt and ruffled his hair. Just a trip, partner. I've got some things to take care of. You'll come back. Luke smiled. You think I'd leave my best firewood chopping buddy? Eli grinned. Luke turned to Sarah. Keep your mama out of trouble. All right, I always do, Sarah said with pride. Finally, he scooped up Ruth, who was already pouting. Don't go, she whispered. I have to, just for a little bit. Promise, he kissed her forehead. Promise. Emma walked with him to the edge of the field where the borrowed horse waited. I won't pretend it doesn't scare me, she said, letting you go. You're not letting me go, he said. You're letting me come back right. Then, as gently as the morning breeze, he added, when I return, if you'll have me, I'd like to make this home. For good. Emma didn't answer with words. She simply reached for his hand, held it for a moment, and let go. Luke mounted the horse and tipped his hat. Back before Christmas, and with that, he rode east, the sun rising at his back, a letter in his coat pocket, and a future worth returning to. Luke arrived at the Waverly Ranch just as the first snow dusted the prairie grass. The estate looked just as he remembered, grand, sprawling, proud, but colder somehow, even with the fires burning in every hearth. His father, Thomas Waverly, was waiting on the porch when he rode in. Older, thinner, but still sharp-eyed, still Waverly to the core. Luke dismounted slowly. Son, Thomas said, voice low, Pa. There was a pause. Then, surprisingly, Thomas stepped forward and pulled him into a rough one-armed hug. I thought I lost you. Luke didn't hug back right away. But then, slowly, he did. Inside, the reunion wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no accusations. Just two men, older and more tired than they wanted to admit. Talking by the fire. I was wrong to try and shape you into my image, Thomas said. I see that now. I was wrong to leave the way I did, Luke replied. I needed to figure out who I was. But I never should have shut you out completely. Silence passed between them, not heavy, just full. Thomas nodded. So, what now? Luke reached into his coat and handed him a piece of paper. A will, a trust, a revised deed. I'm not here to take over, Luke said. But I'll help, from a distance. My life's not here anymore. Thomas studied the document, then looked at his son. She worth it? Luke's smile was quiet and sure. Every mile. 2 weeks later, Luke rode west again. This time with a wagon. In it were tools, warm blankets, a basket of food from the ranch cook, and a small box wrapped in red ribbon. He reached the Carter farm 2 days before Christmas. The children spotted him first. Luke. Eli shouted, running down the hill. Sarah and Ruth followed. Ruth screaming with joy as she flung herself into his arms. Emma stepped out onto the porch, her breath catching in her throat. You came back, she whispered. Luke smiled. Told you I would. That night, the cabin glowed with warmth. Luke handed out simple gifts books for Sarah, a wood carving set for Eli, a new doll for Ruth. Then he turned to Emma and handed her the ribbon-wrapped box. Inside was a delicate, silver locket. She opened it. On one side was a photo of her and the children. On the other, a photo Luke had taken from the ranch of the land, the sunrise, and a small note tucked behind it. Home is where you are. Emma's hand trembled. Luke knelt, not dramatic, not rehearsed, just real. I can't change what I ran from, he said. But I know what I'm running toward now. If you'll have me, Emma, I want to build something with you. Not with money. With love. With honesty. Emma looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and smiled. Epilogue. Spring blooms by spring. The Carter farm looked different. A new roof. A new barn. Fewer struggles. Not because Luke brought money, but because he brought hands, heart, and the kind of wisdom only found when you lose everything and start again. He never boasted about his family name. Most in town didn't even know who he was, and that was how he liked it. But those who visited the farm often said the same thing. There's something different about this place. Something special. And they were right, because the poor widow and her children had once saved a dying cowboy, and he had returned, not with riches, but with roots.